Pittsburgh Steelers fans, it is time once again for another edition of Know Your Enemy. Hanging out, as always, of course, my name is Michael Beck, deputy editor of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Hanging out, joining me as always, our film guru, our one of our contributors to BehindTheSteelCurtain.com, Jeffrey Benedict. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really good. In spite of things. Yeah, in spite of other things, I'm doing good.
And don't adjust your screens. Yes, the man below us is surrounded by New England Patriots gear, but Mitch Milani from the Bottom Line View is an expert in all things NFL. He is joining us tonight, helping out to break down this matchup that has been moved. Mitch, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to talk strictly for one team. It's actually an interesting job you guys have, just focusing on one team all year long. So yeah, it's gonna be fun. Ravens Steelers rivalry. I mean, Mike, you know, I cherish this rivalry. So
yeah, and all the people that will be tuning into this do as well. When you guys log off the show, make sure to check out Mitchell's channel on YouTube, The Bottom Line View. He does cover everything all across the NFL. As we first get into this here, Jeffrey, I'm curious, what are your thoughts on this game being delayed?
I have a lot of them. I tend to follow the Tomlin for inside the Steelers, and as a Steelers fan, I follow the Mike Tomlin route, and that is, you know, give them the time and the day to show up, and let's do it. Like, let's forget all the other stuff, forget all the distractions. In the end, it's football. You know, show up, play the game whenever that game happens. As far as the how this all happened, like it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. What we're hearing now is there's a coach for the Ravens, a strength and conditioning coach that they're disciplining because he's consistently failed to follow the rules for like COVID and player safety. And I'm like, he's a strength and conditioning coach that ignores the rules you put in place for player safety and also the NFL rules about COVID. Like, if you're saying he's consistently done this, why hasn't it already been fixed? Like, why did you wait until after a game has to be moved and you have 7 players unavailable for a game before you're like, hey, man, maybe you should have been following the rules? So I think this is one of those times where, you know what, the initial reaction, people want them to forfeit all these things. Forget that. The NFL needs to really look into this, though. And if the Ravens really were just turning a blind eye while this guy was just blatantly not following rules, then something has to happen.
Yeah, now, Mitch, with that happening, of course, you see in weeks past, Mike Tomlin picked up a $100,000 fine for not having his face mask up for an entire game. Mm-hmm. Pete Carroll, Sean Payton, some pretty hefty fines. The Raiders, of course, lost a mid-round draft pick. Now, in this scenario, a whole locker room kind of got hammered by this pandemic, this outbreak, I should say. And do you think there's any chance that they might be facing any sort of fines up to that level, or do you expect any sort of punishment to come Baltimore's way?
First off, I think it's a punishment that they just simply lose the players in the game. I mean, that's a punishment, especially in this game in particular versus the Steelers. I don't see it being a Raiders fine. I could see it being not a draft pick is what I'm saying. I could see it being possibly to do with the organization. I don't know how you can actually find the players. I don't think you can find the players individually, but you could find the organization in some way. But yeah, I don't see it being the players.
Now, speaking of those 7 players, Jeffrey, what do you think the impact on the game? Like, there's some big name guys that are going to be out. Calais Campbell, Williams, the D tackles out, the 2 starting running backs, the starting center, the backup center. That's going to be huge right there. What's the impact going to be for the Steelers in this one? Because Baltimore's out some pretty key pieces.
Are those all guys that actually tested positive? Or because I kept looking, I couldn't get a really clear distinction between close contact and the guys who actually tested positive, because like the close contacts should be able to come back if they pass all their tests from now on, whereas the guys who have actually tested, I believe, can't come back.
I think the close contacts, it would have had to have been on Monday for close contacts.
Okay.
So anyone post then would be subject not to be able to play. So I think Brandon Williams would be the only person that potentially could play if that is the case. There is some like weird, almost gray area when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah, it's really like we don't have enough information to really be sure who's all going to play right now.
Well, Calais Campbell was already hurt before.
Yeah.
A couple of them were already injured. So
yeah.
Yeah, no, with that, it's going to be interesting to see how the roster shakes up. Of course, Derek Wolfe was on the injury report with a sickness. Whatever that means, that's because when you look at the Steelers, they had Anthony McFarland, who had a sickness. It wasn't COVID, but he hasn't been at the facility for over a week now, or not previously. They had someone else with a sickness that missed a game. They just didn't travel. It didn't end up being COVID, but it was just precautionary. With all that kind of going on now, Mitch, when you look at this situation, what do you think is going on in this Ravens locker room? Do you think they're even to be prepared to play it, or do you think their mind could be off football in one sort of sense?
I have a lot of respect for Harbaugh. I always respect his teams, his preparation. He always seems to have his players going. So I don't think it's going to be necessarily the team's not going to be ready to go. I think if they win, they win. If they lose, it's because they lose. Yeah, it hurts not to have the players out there. But I'm not going to blame it on internal locker room struggle of preparation. It will hurt them in terms of practice because obviously you're taking time away to prep for the Steelers. But again, like Harbaugh, he's been in the biggest of games, and this team has a really strong foundation of leadership. I don't see that necessarily being an excuse for them at all. But yeah, it could hurt them. I just don't know how much. I think, put it in this perspective. The Ravens are one of the teams that I would say, if anyone can overcome this, it's them.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. And on the flip side, the AFC North has been hammered by this, Jeffrey. We've seen that, like the Browns, I believe, put someone on the COVID list this morning. I think the Bengals had put someone on the COVID list. Of course, the Ravens this week has been insane. The Steelers had Vance McDonald and Kevin Dotson test positive, a whole bunch of close positives or close
Contacts.
Thank you, contacts. It's kind of interesting to see how it goes. Like, I know not to relate it in this sort of sense, but because of how Coach Tomlin has kind of handled this, the whole Steelers locker room, I feel like, is really bought into a certain degree. Does that make him more likely to be in some sort of, especially in this weird year, in that kind of coach of the year speak? You know, they have the record. And then on the flip side of it, you see the rest of the AFC North getting absolutely hammered by this, and they're facing these guys that are testing positive. Do you think that might be something that could be factored into some sort of award?
It could end up where the NFL is telling, like, hey, don't be voting coach of the year for people who you are getting fined for not following protocols and are getting in trouble. They could kind of, there are people they can lean on to be like, push your vote away from those guys. I think it should play in, and I think it will end up playing in simply because the teams that are following the protocols are going to have more practices, are going to have more players available, and they're going to win more. Like the Steelers really embraced from the start that this was a season not just about how well you played, but how well you managed COVID and how well you avoided having these kind of outbreaks. They really embraced that from the start, and they're seeing the benefit of it.
Right now, we will talk about a little about the matchup, but of course we have done Know Your Enemy on the Ravens before. It is a fairly similar team, but we will get more into that football stuff as we go. But still continuing on with all the kind of news of the day, we saw a ton of Steelers players take to social media. Mitch, I don't know if you've seen quite the amount it was. Juju, Chase Claypool, Mike Hilton, Duck Hodges, Eric Ebron, like pretty much the whole team was expressing how mad they were. Did you see any of that? And do you think that might add to everything going on, motivate this team going forward?
I think it doesn't motivate them necessarily, but I think it adds to the fuel of the game, like the chippiness of the nature of the rivalry between the Ravens and the Steelers. I think it's just another reason to throw on top of everything within the trash talk, within the lines, and getting in the Ravens' face. I do think there could be something to that, maybe even between Tomlin and Harbaugh, like Tomlin like being like, get your team together. Like, but I don't really see it being like a motivation, like, oh, we got to beat these guys because, we're mad that they couldn't play on Thanksgiving. Like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be interesting to see whether or not that adds to the fire. But I think it might add in a sense that the Steelers lost their bye week earlier this year against the Titans. Like they ended up practicing all week. So the only difference that week is they didn't play on Sunday. Now this week, Mike Tomlin was going to give the Steelers players off till next Wednesday after the game. So almost a week off. So with all that going on, Jeffrey, I'll ask both of you guys this, but with all that going on, the Steelers having no rest essentially this entire year, they practiced as much or more than any team because of all the outside factors. Is clinching this number one seed in the AFC the most important thing for the Steelers team to do?
I don't think so. I think for me, it's being healthy is number one. Like if they go into week 17 and they don't need to win that game and they can't really get the number one seed, I mean, you can just rest guys then. I know they would love to have a bye. That would be a great thing for them. Especially as you were saying, like the team got special permission to violate the collective bargaining agreement and hold from the union and the NFL to hold more practices than they were allowed to on their bye week. Like in that area. So these players are already facing a season where they will practice more than they are allowed to practice. They are going to practice more than they are allowed under the agreement with special permission because the NFL had to move their games. And now they're doing this quick ramp up for the Ravens. And then bam, the day before the game. Oh, by the way, it's Sunday. Sorry about, the days off you didn't get this week either. Like, and the days off you were going to get to make up for it that you also aren't going to get. Like, that's just absolutely crazy that they are the team that is going to twice now have too many practices. That they like. I understand why the players are mad. Like even like Devin Hodges talking, he was like, I was going to go hunting this weekend. Like Saturday and Sunday, I was going to be out hunting. I was just going to go chill, relax, do my own thing, get away from football. That's just healthy. Like that's healthy to get away from work for a weekend. That's just good natural mental health. And they're not allowed to do that. They're not going to be able to do that. And that really sucks if you're, in that situation. So I understand why they're complaining. I expect Tomlin's going to get that reined in. They're not going to keep whining about it, but I understand why they're angry. It's perfectly justified.
You know what? I thought it was interesting because it seemed like all the players did it together. It's almost like the locker room said, you know what? We're tired of this. Yeah. And like, they really are like a very cohesive unit. It seems like if someone's going to say something, they all are. And that's kind of something we saw because like even quiet guys like Bud Dupree was chiming in. It was pretty interesting to see how that went. But Mitch, on the scale of the same question, if the Chiefs were to end up with a bye week, do you think that could like limit the Steelers' ability to even make it to a Super Bowl because they've essentially played at that point? It would be like 20 weeks straight of football.
That's a good question. I think 2020 is extremely unique and it's going to be impossible to predict because something I've been seeing over the course of the season is home field doesn't matter. Like it really doesn't matter. So in past years where let's just put it, being a Patriots fan, like if they had to go to Denver, how much of a difference was that instead of playing in Gillette? Right. So in past years with the crowd and the environment, the only thing that really matters is weather. But then when you look at Kansas City and you look Pittsburgh, it's kind of similar. So, and those are clearly the two top teams in the AFC, in my opinion. Maybe you get a slightly tougher matchup in the playoffs in terms of the not getting the bye and having to continuously play. They do have a chance at the end of the season where they could rest some players like week 17, possibly. So that might negate that factor. I think it has more to do with in the playoffs, the matchups between the two teams, but then what's the weather like? Because I think if Pittsburgh is playing in a game where it's wet and it's snowing, how much does their ability to win that game versus the Chiefs go up? Because I think it's substantial. Because if they play in a game that's a fast track versus Kansas City, it might be a lot more difficult because we know how much they can score. So that is kind of the factor to me more so than rest, or because you could gain momentum. We've seen wild card teams before go to the Super Bowl because they have momentum. So it's a happy balance, and 2020 is going to be really interesting to just kind of watch and see how it unfolds.
Yeah, no, Jeffrey, I do want to ask you that side question on that as well. Like with the Steelers not having a break, do you think that could be the undoing of this team, or is that something that's kind of blown out of proportion?
It hurts. It hurts the players. I think it hurts the player health more than it hurts the team. I think you're more likely to see nagging injuries carry on into the offseason. But mostly for the games, they're going to play through that. They're going, you're going to get those kind of things. I don't think it's a deal breaker. I don't think it's a make or break type of a level of incident. And like one of the commenters in our live chat said, if they want a week off, they can always go to the Super Bowl. Get a week off then.
That is very true. Who even knows if the Ravens continue to test positive and this game gets bumped? Because I know what the NFL's plan was. Because they did have an emergency general managers meeting. If an important seeding game had to be bumped, they'd have to set that to the end of the year in a week 18, and then they would add an 8th playoff team. So that would be extremely interesting to see how that plays out. Because then all of a sudden there is no bye week for anyone. And then I think the Steelers absolutely look at the Browns game to try to rest some people, potentially even the Colts game at that point. Because like you were saying, Mitch, I don't know how much that necessarily matters with the home field advantage. But I'll get to the super chat in 1 second. Mitch, I want to get in the football talk here as well. Yeah. Lamar Jackson, what is going on? The last 4 weeks, he has not been MVP Lamar. What's going on there?
That's a good question. I think it starts with the offensive line. Of course, offensive line play impacts the quarterback, obviously. But the offensive line last year was phenomenal. I mean, how many Pro Bowlers did they send, right? Marshall Yonda, Hall of Famer, retires. Ronnie Stanley, the best left tackle in the league, right? Out. So those guys are hugely impactful. So the time that Lamar has had to throw is dipped. But I think it also has to do with, it has more to do with the players around him. So the offensive line, the receivers. Marquise Brown has not become a number one receiver. He's kind of soft. He, gets pushed off routes. He's not consistent. Mark Andrews has not played to an elite caliber tight end that we saw last year. And all of that collectively has to do with the scheme that they've been running, which we kind of saw similar things with Colin Kaepernick in the same scheme with the same offensive coordinator where he regressed in his second year after being, unreal the first year. So I don't think it's necessarily Lamar because I think Lamar is an elite talent that when you have the pieces around him like other quarterbacks, he can be MVP. But when you strip those pieces away, the run game becomes less efficient the way they relied on it last year. The protection isn't as good. The receivers aren't as good. He's going to regress into an area that he's good, but he's not MVP because he does have his flaws with he's not as accurate. He's not, those are his flaws. He's not the greatest passer, but if you allow him to be a dynamic athlete, that's when he can take over and be the best quarterback in the league at times.
Right now, Snowman did put $5 in the tip jar and says, what happens if those Ratbirds players are still sick? Do they postpone the game until later in the year or what? I did kind of answer that, but it's going to be interesting to see when those positive tests stop. We saw with the Titans, I believe that lasted like 10 days. I think it was 10 consecutive days they had positive tests. So it could be bumped to a week 18. It most likely still going to go on Sunday just without those players if no one else tests positive from here on out. But it will be interesting to see how that goes. Now, Jeffrey, outside of that, Lamar Jackson and this whole Ravens team, what's the difference between the two teams from when they played in week 8 versus when they're playing now?
Yeah, we saw them against the Steelers was really a kind of a turn. We saw him after the bye, and I was in here building up John Harbaugh and how good he has the week after the bye and coming out of the bye and how good that team does. We've seen the opposite. We've seen the exact opposite this year. Came into the bye at 5-1. They're 1-3 since the bye week. Marquise Brown, I was going to call him Antonio. Marquise Brown, his stats have fallen through the floor. Like he has just dropped off. He started pretty good. He has gone steadily and steadily worse as the season goes on. I agree with Mitch. He is at this point still a football player, but not a wide receiver. He is a phenomenal guy with the ball in his hands, but he is not a good wide receiver yet.
And that's the thing, right? Like they don't give him the ball in space. Like they don't like use him as Debo Samuel. It's not like they like give him little reverses and stuff. He's just, okay, run your route.
Yeah, and he's not that guy.
Yeah,
he's not that guy. Like the Steelers, even when Antonio Brown was really young, he was not really a good wide receiver yet. They found ways to get him the ball. They found they would bump guys off of him to get him freed up and just get him an easy catch and then let him go do his thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even more than Brown is we're seeing the loss of Mark Ingram. The decline of Mark Ingram, the injury he had, and since he's returned from that knee injury, he was out against the Steelers. And since he's returned, 7 rushes for 7 yards. He is not the same player. It's the same impact you saw with Alvin Kamara. If you look at Alvin Kamara's stats on the Saints when Ingram was there versus now, Alvin Kamara is still the same running back, but his yards per carry have dropped. His touchdown numbers have dropped. His big plays have dropped in the run game. He's still a great receiver. But it's just that when you lose that threat of a guy who can just plow into the line and drive for 4 or 5 yards, drive into a pile, break through and gain a 20-yard gain when you thought you had 4 guys on him, like that kind of power makes a guy like Lamar Jackson so much more dangerous because you have to jam the middle. You have to. When he fakes that handoff on their veer play, when he goes again, if that's Mark Ingram going to take that handoff, you have to dogpile the middle of the field or they're getting 5-6 yards. And so when he pulls it out and runs, you're all trapped in the middle. When it's a J.K. Dobbins, when it's a Gus Edwards, it's not the same threat, especially with J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins runs like Lamar. Like he's got more power than Lamar, but they're both fast. They're both big play breaking capable guys. But Dobbins isn't going to run into 3 defenders and drag them for another 3 yards. You get 2 guys on Dobbins, you've tackled him. Mark Ingram, you got 2 guys on Mark Ingram, you need to bring a couple more because he's going to keep grinding yards. So he doesn't. That has really hurt as you don't have that threat pulling so many people inside with their 3 wide receiver sets, with their spread, more spread looking offense out of that pistol. I think that is a big hurt. Other than that, the offensive line is not the same. The run game is not the same without Ingram. The Steelers are going to face Gus Edwards, who gashes them horribly for some reason.
He's good.
Yeah, he's very solid. He's a very solid running back. Yeah. He just happens to have the Steelers number. Like the Steelers are like, we don't know how to tackle this guy. I don't know where's he going to run? We don't know. We forgot how football works. So that's it for me. Like really, Mark Ingram, run game, and whatever is going on inside Marquise Brown's brain. It's like they fast forwarded to the end of Antonio Brown's career with this kid.
What's the point of having soldiers if you're not going to use them?
Yeah, I don't know.
The infamous tweet from Hollywood Brown hasn't done anything since then.
Yeah, what's the point of having wide receivers if they can't run routes? Like back at you, bud.
That's what they did say about DK Metcalf, though. To be fair.
That's true.
DK is a whole other animal.
That's true. I love DK Metcalf. My scout evaluation on him was he's not really a great route runner, but who cares?
Yeah.
If you can run straight forward and you're like, please, we can't stop him, it doesn't matter.
Oh goodness. Mitch, speaking of the Steelers, they're 10-0, yet they're one of the more disrespected teams seemingly in this league. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why they're picking up so much flack. Do you have any idea why people are hating on them as much? And do you understand? Do you side with that, that observation, or what's going on there?
I think, okay, so I like the Chiefs more. I think the Chiefs are better. But that's kind of like because of if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man, right? Ric Flair, baby. So it... the Steelers are really good. I would have them as the number 2 team in the NFL. They're undefeated. They've played great. I think they're one of the more balanced teams in the NFL, and that's something that's been very difficult to see. I've recently said that defense doesn't exist in the NFL right now, And I believe it doesn't. I mean, when you look across the league, I think it's probably the highest scoring season we've ever had. I don't know that for sure, but I could probably guess. And the Steelers, yes, they've been getting disrespected. I think it has to do with what people are looking for from their teams nowadays in terms of when they're viewing and how they're watching. Okay, so the Steelers aren't a scroll through Instagram, see a highlight play team, right? They're not a box score team. They're kind of old school in that way. They're not the Chiefs. They're not going to put up 40 points every week. They're more of a built on their defense and Ben making plays with his receivers. And I think it also has to do with, from more of the professional side or media side, it has a lot to do with the competition they face, because they haven't faced like the top team in the NFC or the AFC. Everybody's kind of like, we're still waiting for them to play Kansas City or New Orleans or whatever. And they just haven't been able to play that team yet, even though they have beat the teams that are good when they've faced them, right? The Titans, I guess the Ravens are considered good, but like, yeah, I think it's a combination of all those things right now.
Yeah, and you know what? I think to a degree, it is fair that people look at this team and are saying like, oh, like, are they really that good? Like you can point at the schedule a little bit. It is interesting at the time of playing some of these teams. The Steelers have beat as many teams with winning records as the Chiefs had at this point in the year. So that is something I think worth noting. But like you said, like they still have to. I think the measuring stick of this year is whether or not they can beat the Chiefs. And at this point in the season, that is probably only going to happen in an AFC Championship. So that's really what it's going to boil down to. It'll be interesting to see where it goes from there. Now, Jeffrey, in the same sense, do you think the Steelers are getting disrespected, but then are people within the Steelers fan base just been able to watch this team on a weekly basis, win every single game? Do you think that's where the Steelers side of all this is stemming from?
I think the being 10-0, everyone wants to see, we have the best record. We're the best team. We have faced good teams. And when we faced scrappy teams, we've managed to get it done. The Chiefs lost to the Raiders. I mean, they lost to the Raiders. We've beat teams as good as the Raiders. Like, we've done that. Like, we haven't lost anybody on that kind of a level. So I understand people saying that. But I also understand the power rankings. Like, I understand why you put the Chiefs ahead. I laughed when I saw someone putting the Saints ahead of the Steelers. That's ridiculous. But the Chiefs, like, I got to agree with Mitch again. Like, seriously, defense in the NFL is not something. That's not something Roger Goodell wants. He doesn't. Yeah. They don't want defense to be the story in the NFL. I think as the playoffs come closer, maybe we see a little more defense be important. But as long as it's the current NFL, and you've got Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce on the same team, I don't know how you can go wrong putting the Chiefs ahead of anybody, including the Steelers, in a season where we've lost Devin Bush. I love the guys we have. I love the way our defense has played. But seriously, how do you match up with the Chiefs? You look at our defense, you look at the Chiefs, you say, the Steelers are going to have a hard time matching up with them. So I understand it. I do think the Steelers deserve a little more credit for actually being 10-0. Like, it's not. Yeah. If you're undefeated, you've played a weak schedule. You have. Like, you just have. The 72 Dolphins, someone showed that they beat teams. They had like two games against the team that finished with a winning record. It was the same team. They beat the same team twice, and that was the only team they faced with a winning record. Like, that's how you go undefeated. That's simply how it is in the NFL. So the Steelers do deserve more credit, but I also think Steeler fans get a little too defensive about their team. They're used to it, though. They're used to Ben Roethlisberger being listed as like the 14th best quarterback in the NFL when he's clearly in the discussion of top 5, if not a lock in the top 5. And we're just used to it. We're just used to that because people get tired of putting the Steelers high. And also, I still do. I know those articles are written just to get me to click on them because I'm like, you can't put the Steelers that low. And it works. I still click on them. Yeah. And, I still click on them. I still get angry. When people post like, look at this guy, I click on it and go and give him another view. Like, I'm going to do it So I understand why they do it. I understand why Steelers fans get defensive. It's a whole mess. But it's not surprising to me.
All right, so everyone listening on the podcast platform right now, we are going to switch over to our second part. If you're watching on YouTube, just hang tough, and we will be right back in the second part. Now, Pittsburgh Steelers fans, we are hanging out once again. It's BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Michael Beck, Jeffrey Benedict, and our special guest, Mitch Milani from the Bottom Line View, hanging out with you tonight, talking a little bit about the Steelers-Ravens matchup and everything that's kind of led up to the game that was supposed to be tomorrow. It's going to go on Sunday. If you didn't already know, I hate to break the news to you, but Sunday at 1:15 on NBC, this is when that game is now kicking off. Now, Mitch, question right off the top here. Should the Steelers dominate this game? When you look at the teams, you look who the Ravens are missing, you look at the Ravens' injuries, and you see how the Steelers have gotten healthier from the last time they played. Plus, you factor in this game being in Pittsburgh. Should this be an absolutely cakewalk of a game for the Steelers?
I would never say that a Ravens-Steelers game is going to be a cakewalk. I've seen too many competitive games. But I do expect the Steelers to win the game. Maybe that's a spoiler. I don't know. I do expect the Steelers to win the game because I just feel they're healthier. They're playing better football. What we've seen of the Ravens, I think maybe people are starting to turn the corner on them from preseason expectation. But I saw week after week, like the last 3 weeks, I'm like, are you guys watching the Ravens play? Like, they're not the best team right now. They're not even a playoff team at the moment. So yeah, they're not what we thought they would be coming into the year, at least the majority of people. So they have a lot of injuries. There is a matchup, though, or within the matchups, I do feel like there's areas where the Steelers can't necessarily take advantage of the Ravens' deficiencies, specifically the Steelers' run game versus the Ravens' run defense. Ravens' run defense is bad right now because they're without Brandon Williams and Calais Campbell. When those guys are in, they're great, but they're not. The Patriots ran all over them. The Titans ran all over them. I don't think the Steelers have the same run game as those teams do currently. So that might be difficult because the Ravens still have a good secondary. So that at least they can still match up with the Steelers receivers in the passing game. So I think it's going to be a defensive game. I think it's going to be low scoring because I see the Steelers defense having a rebound from the last matchup, containing the run better. Lamar has struggled passing. They're going to get after him. They haven't been able to protect him very well. So I think the Steelers should win, but I would expect it to be a low-scoring, close game.
Now, Jeffrey, speaking of Lamar, not just in this matchup, but historically, his 2 games against the Steelers have been the 2 worst games of his career. Yeah, can you explain why that necessarily has been and why the Steelers have been able to take advantage of the reigning league MVP?
Well, there's 2 things that show up. One is Lamar has a bad game, and 2 is Gus Edwards gains more yards than he should, and the Ravens kind of gash us in the running game. And the reason that is our approach to dealing with their offense is to get hits on Lamar. And week 17 of last year when they put in RG3, we did the same thing. It was just TJ Watt coming off that edge, going straight at Lamar, going straight at them. And if they don't have the ball when he gets there, he just shoves them. He doesn't tackle him. He puts hands on them, like kind of just they're there. RG3 was thrown off that whole week 17 game. I mean, the Steelers could do nothing to do anything to offset anything the Ravens did. We were terrible that week. But RG3 was constantly complaining about it. He's like, dude, they're hitting me every single play no matter what I do. And that's what we're going to do. And we do the same thing to Lamar Jackson. The counter to it is the Steelers then run, as it usually is, Gus Edwards right at where TJ Watt should be. They're like, okay, if TJ Watt's going to hit Lamar, then Lamar hand it off and Gus Edwards run where TJ Watt needs to be, and he won't be there. And they gash us for big gains, but we take the quarterback out of the equation. So really, it's kind of, I understand the strategy for the Steelers. It frustrates me that we give up all the big run plays, but it's kind of like we'd rather see you try to beat us with Gus Edwards than try to beat us with Lamar Jackson. Like, we respect Lamar Jackson. He can win a game. Gus Edwards being your sole offense and trying to win a game, we're not worried about that. We're not worried about Gus Edwards single-handedly beating us. So we'll keep coming, keep putting contact on Lamar, keep messing with him, keep keep disrupting what he's trying to do.
Now, Mitch, do you think that's a game plan the Steelers might employ in this game?
Yeah, the way I think I look at the Steelers defense and why they match up so well with Lamar is because they have those edge setters. So that's what you need to be able to do versus the Ravens, because you need to be able to take away the big play of Lamar. That's why with what we're saying here is Lamar is the big play threat. It's not the running back, because he's the speed. If he gets to the edge, he's gone a lot of the times for 20-yard gains. So by setting the edge with Watt and with Dupree, those two guys are fast and strong and good versus the run. So they can kind of set that edge, force it inside. And then the Steelers are basically saying, okay, we have really good interior linemen. Like maybe we're going to, maybe you're going to get a couple runs here and there, but most of the times our guys are going to win the reps. So they're basically saying we're going to let our 3-4 guys in the middle, clog up the lanes and hopefully you only get 3-yard gain, and then we'll force you into a passing situation and we'll get after you. But that's why I think Lamar struggles versus them, because they have that great strength in the middle, but able to set the edge as well.
Now, flipping from the Ravens running game and how they've been so successful against the Steelers, now looking at the Steelers running game in this one, absolute worst case scenario, it appears likely that Calais Campbell will not be able to play. There's just not enough time to test negative. Brandon Williams, I think he has the extreme close contact plus an injury, so likelihood of him playing, I would say, is fairly slim, 50-50 at best right now. Derek Wolfe, who knows if he has an illness, whether or not he's even allowed to play. Say those three guys are out, Jeffrey. Do you think James Conner can actually have like a really memorable day in this matchup?
I wouldn't say memorable. I think we could see what we saw against the Jacksonville Jaguars. A kind of a solid game, not a great game, but a really solid game where the pass has set up the run. Our offensive line just isn't there right now. David DeCastro has not been the same since he came back from that injury. He's pass blocking great. He is not getting pushed in the run game. He's holding his own, but he's not able to drive guys back. They're not creating the holes. So it's the good news is the Steelers beat the crap out of the Cincinnati Bengals when they tried that, putting an extra linebacker in the box and take away the short pass game. We finally broke that. And you saw against the Jaguars, they rarely used it, and the run game got going a little more. The Steelers have a solution. If you put extra guys in the box and just try to do what the Titans did to us, we have solutions for that now. So I do think James Conner will gain respectable yards. I don't think he's going to have like a great game where we say, wow, James Conner just really torched the Ravens. I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Now, Mitch, on the flip side of the ball for the Ravens, their O-line is also in shambles right now. Of course, Ronnie Staley broke his ankle. He's out for the year. No Marshall Yanda. Skura, their starting center, the backup center who started for him a week ago, both going to be out in this game. Do you think the Steelers' front seven that's been so good this year could have a memorable game in that sense?
I would expect that's probably where they're going to win the game, because I think, like we said about their run game, that was what was so surprising the first time they played, because I expected like the Steelers with their number one run defense to be able to contain, but it's interesting because the way the Steelers play run defense is kind of like chaotic, and they try to just send people, like almost run blitz people. So that's kind of maybe why they gash them so much. So I expect them to be a little bit more conservative versus the run, and then send that chaotic blitz nature versus the pass. So yeah, I expect their pass rush to win the game, because the key to playing Lamar is, and the Ravens, because they have no good receivers or receiving weapons, is to force them into the third situation. Some teams, like the Chiefs, you don't want them to pass. You want them to run. But with the Ravens, you want them to pass. So as long as they can handle that early down run, then they'll be fine on third down. And they could get, 3-4 sacks in this game, I think.
Something worth noting, that first Ravens game too, Tyson Alualu only played 6 snaps. He's one of the highest grading defensive linemen there is in football this year. Mike Hilton missed that entire game, who's kind of like an extra linebacker on the field as a nickel corner. Speaking of linebackers, though, however, Jeffrey, we kind of saw Robert Spillane kind of get targeted a little bit early in that Jaguars matchup. Of course, the Steelers did go out and invest a little bit of draft capital in bringing Avery Williamson into the fold. Do you think this is the week that Williamson kind of gets infused a little bit more into this defense, or are they still kind of trying to ease him in, or just kind of let him play that reserve role?
I expect this to be a heavy dose of Robert Spillane. I expect it to be Spillane and Vince Williams because they're going to be jamming that run game. Robert Spillane's single best attribute is he switches from man coverage to blitzing in a heartbeat. He is so aware of that situation, and we run that a lot, where if your job is to cover the running back and you see that running back blocking, get after the quarterback, like go, but you still have to be responsible if that guy leaks out. And Robert Spillane is doing that job at a very high level. So I expect we will keep him on the field as much as possible. I don't think Avery Williamson is going to play much at all. If we can start forcing the Ravens into dime, then you'll see obviously Spillane and Williams come out. But I expect a lot of Williams. I expect a lot of Spillane as they really, really double down to stuff the run game and make Lamar beat him with his arm.
Now, Mitch, the last couple of weeks, we've heard the word trap game get thrown around a lot. It's interesting, though, to this matchup specifically. Do you think the Steelers could take the Ravens lightly, or is the matchup just too big? Because you still got to keep in mind how many players the Ravens will be missing.
Maybe. I'll never rule it out. Maybe, but I mean, this is like your brother. You're playing them. This. I don't think you can ever take that rivalry lightly. So. Yeah, if it was, again, I thought, the Cowboys game, that was a trap game. Even though they won the game, it was a trap game. Like, there might be games down the schedule where they play a team that's not as good as them on paper, that they just come out flat. That could definitely happen. But the Ravens, I know they're missing a lot of players. I don't think so. Yeah,
and I think that the factor of them being pretty angry about everything going on will keep it from being a trap game. But how about this one for a tougher question for you, Jeffrey? Actually, I'll ask both of you guys, but Jeffrey first. Who has a better chance of making the playoffs this year? The Cleveland Browns or the Baltimore Ravens?
You know what? Nick Chubb is back. I'm going Cleveland.
Yeah,
when Nick Chubb is there, he's their entire offense, and he's unstoppable right now.
Mitch?
He's pretty good. Yeah, Nick Chubb's pretty good at football. But the Cleveland Browns actually are probably the right answer, even though I don't think they're as good of a team, because the Cleveland Browns, I believe, play one of the easiest schedules in football the rest of the year. So I actually looked at their schedule the other day. I can't exactly remember, but it was like not any teams that I would consider much better than Cleveland. And the crazy thing is, I just said on my picks video today, the Cleveland Browns are the best bad team I've seen in a couple of years. Like, I don't think Cleveland's good at all. And they've gotten blown out by the Ravens. Whenever they play a good team, they get blown out but they take care of business versus the teams they should beat. And that's kind of like those teams that end up 10-6-ish. And that's probably Cleveland.
Yeah, that 10-6 purgatory, almost like some years you make the playoffs, some years you don't, but you'll never win a championship. I still think they're a quarterback away from actually being anything really special, but I'm also leaning that way.
They're definitely a quarterback away.
The Browns are going to have
Baker Mayfield sucks.
The Browns are going to have a 2-game advantage on the Ravens.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
They play the Steelers week 17, but as we've talked about a lot, the Steelers might be resting a ton of players that game.
Yeah.
I know outside of that, like even if the Ravens blew them out again, like the Browns are still going to have a game advantage, and Baltimore's still going to win out the rest of the year if they want to surpass the Browns. So in that sense, it's going to be really interesting. Now, speaking of the Ravens, Jeffrey, in this game specifically, do the Baltimore Ravens have enough offensive weapons if this game crept into the 30-point range? Like if the Steelers put up 30 in this game, do the Ravens have enough on offense to match that?
No, absolutely not. They need a breakout game. They would need like a huge breakout game from somebody, like J.K. Dobbins suddenly just turns into an absolute beast on the field, starts breaking tackles, and just break a tackle and then gone. Then maybe like you'd need like a 200-yard game from Dobbins. You'd need Marquise Brown to suddenly figure out how to play wide receiver. You need something huge for this team to be a 30-point team, in my opinion. Alternately, if the defense could score a few touchdowns, if there's always the option of Ben Roethlisberger decides to come out and have a 4-interception game. There's always that in the cards. We haven't seen that from him this year. We've seen a couple of picks that really weren't that bad of a throw, or they were kind of like, yeah, you know why you did that throw. We understand. But we haven't seen a game where he just keeps, like, he can't get it going and he's pick after pick. We haven't seen that yet. That's always but that's the only way. That's really the only way this game is going to be that kind of a shootout.
Now, Mitch, in the same sense there, what do the Ravens have to keep the Steelers under, like a point total wise? Like, sure, the Ravens could score 24 and win, or could they only score 17? Did they have to hold the Steelers to under 17? What number, to put you on a spot here, but like, what number would you think, like, oh man, like Baltimore really can't let the Steelers score more than?
I would probably say it's around mid-20, like 24, 23, somewhere 21, maybe somewhere in that range. I would say.
Yeah, and you know what? If that's what it came down to, and the Steelers put up, like you're saying, 23 points, I feel like that's probably a win for the Steelers too. Like we've seen the Ravens defense score a few times this year. Potentially, that's something.
Marcus
I feel
Peters
like
can always score, so
it is true. He's such a gambler. He's either getting absolutely like shredded or he's taking one of the house. It's really interesting to see how teams attack him, especially when they play good teams, like against the Chiefs earlier this year. He just looked like a fool, like all game long. They're like, oh, you think it's a slant, but no, it's a sluggo, and we're just going to hit you up the seam here. Oh, you think we're running out? No, double move, come back inside. Like he just did not look right. So in that sense, it will be interesting. On the flip side of that, Jeffrey, Ben Roethlisberger, can he have a big game in this one? Sure, like there isn't that same level of pass rush, but the Ravens secondary is still like elite. Can Ben Roethlisberger rip like the same sort of stats he had a couple weeks ago when he was over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and no picks sort of thing?
Well, I know people are saying the Ravens secondary is still elite, but who's their fourth cornerback? Who's their number 4? Because I believe it was Tremont Williams, who is a year younger than Ben Roethlisberger.
He was really good last year. I just want to put it out there.
But he's 37. Yeah. Like, and he's not big enough to, like, he's going to be facing someone good. Like, he's going to be facing a Deontay Johnson. He's going to be facing a James Washington. He's going to be facing a Ray McLeod, which, okay, maybe Ray won't give him that much trouble. But, like, he's going to have those kind of matchups. I think this is another game where the Steelers need to accept that, okay, if we can't get the run game going, drop into that 10 personnel, go empty set, and just be like, who's your worst defender? Because we're throwing at them all game. There's not a matchup. You can't hide a receiver. You can't hide a cornerback sufficiently from this offense because we have too much depth at wide receiver. I think it's that kind of a game. I really think the Steelers need to just go out and say, all right, Ben's throwing it, and you don't have the depth to handle everybody, especially with Jimmy Smith coming off that injury. It was questionable whether he was going to play on Thursday. I expect he will play, but there's not much room for error. When you've got a 37-year-old as your number 4 and you've got a guy coming off an injury, coming back with a ankle injury, which may, that can affect your ability to move side to side and cut with people. If he's out there on Deontay Johnson like he did the previous game where he did really good on Deontay Johnson, I don't think he can handle Deontay Johnson if his ankle is 100%. So there's questions all around there, and I really expect the Steelers to end up with Ben Roethlisberger slinging the ball around and Ben being the big reason the Steelers win. As always.
No, they really live and die by Ben. But Mitch, moving forward into the season here, the Steelers have the potential. It's not going to happen because the Jets would have to beat the Dolphins, but the Steelers could potentially clinch a playoff spot this week. It's not going to happen. Next week, they play the Washington football team. It should happen next week. They win 2 games. Then all of a sudden they're playoff bound. Like they already are playoff bound with the expanded playoff field, already hitting 10 wins. But it's confirmed then with this lack of rest. When do you think the Steelers should start kind of focusing on giving people some rest? Essentially, should they start looking at times where they should potentially give Ben a game off, or they should only play their starters for a half, or is that sort of a myth? Is the rust factor too much, or should they start looking to actually start rest some of these guys down the stretch?
I've seen both. I've seen the team that gets rest better prepared. I've seen the team that gets rest come out flat and lose the first playoff game. I've seen, being a Patriots fan, like Belichick never takes dudes off the field. They always play. So like it's really up to the coach and the team and the situation. I think if a lot of guys are beat up and they need the rest them. If they don't need the rest and they seem to be okay 100%. But it also depends on this year and the playoff format. Like, is there a bye? Is there no bye? Because that's a big deal too. Like, what if the Steelers and the Chiefs what if the Steelers are undefeated and the Chiefs only have one loss, right? Like a lot of things and there's only one bye. It's not like past years where there's two byes. So I really think it depends. I would say the week 17, that's the time to rest your players if you're going to rest your players. Up to that point, play your players, play to win.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Jeffrey, no, I think we were talking about it off air last week. What is your sense on kind of resting players, specifically Ben Roethlisberger?
Ben Roethlisberger does not have a great history when he rests for multiple weeks. If he is out for like a couple of weeks, that game back is really hit or miss. Every once in a while he has a good one, but most of those games are not great. He is not a guy I want to see sitting down week 17 and then for a first round bye. He's not a guy I want to see resting 2 weeks in a row, like give him, light work in week 16 and then he sits down week 17 and then has a bye. Like that's just a recipe to get Ben, like, especially now that he's older, like get him kind of settled, get him out of his groove. It takes him a while to get heated up. We're seeing him just now finding his timing, finding that deep ball connection. He has been such a much better quarterback the last 2 weeks than he was earlier in the season, despite the fact that he was playing great and putting up great numbers. You're just seeing him do more impressive throws. You're seeing him do more impressive things as a quarterback now than he was earlier. I don't want to see him sitting on the sidelines in a coat. I don't want to see that for 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to in this one, looking back to when the Steelers lost to the Jaguars in the playoffs in 2017, they rested their starters week 17, had a bye, then they went down 21 points in the first quarter of the Jaguars. And that was Ben a few years younger and with his old tendon still in his elbow. So I think that's something to keep in mind. I think he really needs to play at least a half in week 17. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards, especially if they're 15-0 and the Kansas City Chiefs are 14-1. Because then all of a sudden it's like all that work you did to get here could get thrown out the window if you lose this game to the Browns. And then all of a sudden, because both teams have the same single divisional loss, then it's the eighth tiebreaker. All of a sudden you could be screwed because the Chiefs had more passing yards than you. Like one of those ridiculous tiebreakers. Yeah. So I think in that sense, they should be playing to win as long as the Chiefs continue to win. You look at their schedule, it's a little bit harder for the Chiefs down the stretch, but it'll be interesting to see where that goes. Moving on here, I'm interested to get your guys' X factors in this game. I'll start with Jeffrey to give Mitch a minute to think of an X factor in this one. What are you leaning towards as one specific player to really kind of take over this game?
Deontay Johnson. Ben has been hot throwing to him these last 2 weeks. Their timing is getting really good, and that is Deontay Johnson's game. He is all about sharp cuts, and if Ben is hitting him, that's just going to be consistent yardage, and that's what you need against the Ravens. If you're gonna you get a drive going with some cheap passes, cheap yards here, cheap yards there, with just those quick like boom drop throw, and he catches a 5-yard in route, stuff like that. That's going to be where the Steelers set up bigger plays, set up the run game, do all of that by getting that timing routes going. And if Jimmy Smith isn't, that ankle is giving him any trouble, that knee ankle, it was a leg injury. If that's giving any trouble with his lateral mobility, then Deontay Johnson could be a huge factor in this game.
Right now, Mitch, what are you thinking for an X factor?
He went offense. I'll go defense. I'm thinking Bud Dupree. I think, right? The edge setter. I brought up the edge setter, how essential it is to play the Ravens in the run game and in the pass game, and their pass rush is going to be a big reason I believe they will win. So I'm going to go Bud Dupree.
I'll throw it out too. Terrell Edmonds. What a turnaround. His stats are absolutely ridiculous this year compared to just a year ago already. 2 interception game against the Jaguars. If Terrell Edmonds is picking up 2 interceptions in a game, I guarantee you the Steelers are winning that game.
Can he catch it?
But he's got to shut down Mark Andrews again, who, as another person that was on the injury report, that was someone questionable for Thursday game. I think he would have played because of the importance of the game already, but since it's being bumped back a couple days, I think you're seeing Mark Andrews for sure. What Terrell Edmonds can do to shut him down will be one of the keys to the game. Mitch, one of the things we also like to do on our show is if you could pluck one player off the Steelers roster and put them on your team's roster, who would it be? I'm not letting you say TJ Watt. Because everyone said that until we changed the rule about a week ago. But I'm curious if you could take one player off the Steelers roster that's not named TJ Watt, who would it be?
That makes it more difficult because I would have definitely picked TJ Watt. The Patriots need receivers. I don't know if you've seen them play this year. So I'm going to take – I really, really, really like both Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, so it's kind of a tough one. I would say in terms of the ceiling, it would be Chase Claypool. If I was to say right now, it would be Deontay Johnson.
Okay. Jeffrey, plucking one guy off the Ravens. Who's it going to be?
One guy from the Ravens. Okay, that's you're gonna give me say, oh man.
I know who it is.
I'll take Dobbins. J.K.
Dobbins.
Wow, really?
Like, I'm not taking Lamar. I'm not taking him. We don't have a team built for him. Like, we don't. I don't think that works. But I guess, yeah, I'll take Lamar. I not that I take Lamar. I mean, guys, yes, I'll take J.K. Dobbins as another running back. I don't like their roster. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't like it.
It's funny. I feel like I said something along the lines of that on Twitter, and I was ripped apart for it before the season started. Like, looking at the Ravens, like, I don't like their receiving core. Yeah. I don't like their offensive line without Marshall Yanda. What is old man Mark Ingram do?
Well, here's the thing. Even if you look, I said that last year. That's where I was wrong, right? Yeah. And then all of a sudden, 12 Pro Bowlers. What? Where?
Yeah, no kidding. Before we get out here, as we're getting to the top of the clock, we also like to do our score predictions. Mitch, I know you did say you spoiled it a little bit, but if you could put a hard number on this game, which way are you leaning, and what's the final score?
I'm going to go Steelers 24-17.
One score game. That's still that's breaking the spread, but Jeffrey, what are you thinking?
I went with I was going to say it was going to be close last week, and I went away from that, and I was right. I'm going to say this week I'm going to go again with a big score, 31-10 Steelers.
It's a big score. Mitch, I see your reaction. We had an article, of course, our website. We're all geared up, changed our podcast schedule for the game to be tomorrow night. So it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of the week goes from here. I'm not actually too sure. I got to hit our group chat after this, but we were going to have our scores come out tomorrow, and my score was extremely similar to what Jeffrey's was. I said the Steelers 31, 31-13 was my final score prediction. I with just all the injuries, especially on a short week, I thought that was going to be a huge one. I might tweak it a little bit to be a little bit closer, but I think I might wait to see on how all the injuries kind of fall into place as the week goes on here. But I am definitely leaning Steelers a little bit more heavily. As we get out, Mitch, anything you want to plug just to before we get out here? Bottom line view, what kind of stuff can people expect from you?
Yeah, so you could check me out at the Bottom Line View on YouTube. NFL content basically every day, NFL picks, fantasy content, cover the entire NFL. So if you're interested in that analysis and all that fun stuff, check out the Bottom Line View on YouTube.
Awesome. Jeffrey, I'm sure you got some great film rooms coming up. I'm sure you had it probably planned out a little bit differently with the game tomorrow. So are we expecting a film room tomorrow, or is that going to have to wait?
No, my normal Thursday film room came out today. It was titled "Be Thankful You're Not Jake Luton Facing the Steelers Pass Rush." It was a fun video to make. and it covers a lot of the lesser known aspects of how the Steelers pass rush, including a phenomenal play by TJ Watt where he just crashed into an offensive lineman and created almost an interception off of it by really not beating anyone. It was a great play. Really shows off the intelligence, the athleticism, the execution, the selflessness of the Steelers pass rush, and how Keith Butler has molded them into the best pass rush the NFL has seen in a very long time.
Awesome. Now, as we get out, want to make sure to remind everyone to click over to behindthesteelcurtain.com for great articles, daily analysis and recap, some commentary as the week goes on. Of course, everything's going to be a little bit different with the game Sunday, but you're still going to get great content from our website. Of course, check out our entire podcast family. And as Snowman says, he puts $5 on the tip jar. He says, Happy Thanksgiving to Steelers Nation. I'll echo that. Happy Thanksgiving to all of you. Enjoy the turkey. Try to enjoy some football. The matchups aren't as good as it was going to be, I will admit, but I
no
hope
five-star
everyone has
matchups.
Yeah, because we're not in it. But
yeah, we're not in it.
Enjoy your weekend. Be safe, and we will see you guys next week.